The educational matrix, the deep architecture. Most contemporary schooling and learning methods are a collection of industrial-age rituals, optimized for compliance rather than competence. We have inherited a 19th-century Prussian model, a system originally designed to produce obedient soldiers and factory workers, and we are attempting to run it on 21st-century biological hardware. This is not merely an inefficiency. It is a structural mismatch that results in systemic cognitive friction, leading to the widespread burnout we see today. The storage failure, why rote memorization fails. Rote memorization is a biological storage failure. It treats the human brain like a static, silicon hard drive rather than a dynamic, plastic neural network. By forcing the brain to store isolated data points without a relational framework, the system prioritizes short-term recall over long-term neural integration. In a natural environment, the brain is a survival organ. It is ruthlessly efficient at pruning or deleting information that lacks immediate utility. When you memorize a date or a formula solely for a Friday test, your biology recognizes it as noise. Consequently, the information is purged by the brain's waste management system almost as soon as the external pressure is released. You didn't learn the history, you just rented the data for 48 hours. The ego drug, the standardized testing trap. Standardized testing operates as a performance-enhancing drug for the ego. It provides a numerical high that masks a fundamental lack of critical synthesis. We have conditioned a generation to chase the metric rather than the mastery. This creates a dangerous psychological feedback loop. If the metric, the grade, is achieved, the brain signals mission accomplished and shuts down the curiosity engine. The actual knowledge is left to evaporate because the reward was the number on the paper, not the ability to solve a problem in the physical world. This is why high-achieving students often struggle in high-stakes, unpredictable professional environments. They have optimized for a closed system with a single correct answer. But the world is an open system with infinite variables. The bandwidth bottleneck, the lecturer-student model. The lecturer-student model is a low-bandwidth data transfer protocol. It is a legacy system of one-way communication that ignores the physiological reality of active engagement. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of high-level logic and executive function, begins to desynchronize after only 10 to 15 minutes of passive reception. Without a feedback loop or a physical application of the data, the transfer efficiency drops to near zero. It is the equivalent of trying to download a massive file over a dial-up connection while the receiver's computer is in sleep mode. True learning is a bidirectional exchange. It requires the learner to be an active processor, not a passive vessel. Chemical bribes, the extrinsic reward loop. Grade-based motivation is an extrinsic reward loop, a chemical bribe that inevitably leads to cognitive burnout. When the A is the primary goal, the subject matter itself becomes an obstacle to be cleared rather than a tool to be wielded. This creates a compliance-based intelligence where the student learns to please the authority figure rather than satisfy their own intellectual hunger. Once the exam ends or the degree is granted, the biological incentive to retain or expand that knowledge disappears entirely. This is why many people forget their entire college education within 5 years. The external stimulus that held the information in place was removed. The relic, the curriculum as a bottleneck. The curriculum acts as a structural bottleneck, restricting the velocity of information to the pace of the slowest node in the network. In a world of near-instant data access, the fixed-pace classroom is a mechanical relic. It punishes the fast learner with boredom, leading to behavioral issues, and it punishes the deep, slow learner with a lack of nuance, forcing everyone into a mediocre middle ground. Education should be asynchronous and mastery-based. You shouldn't move to step B because it is Tuesday. You should move to step B because you have demonstrated total competence in step A. Anything else is just a conveyor belt moving products toward a deadline. The sensory trap, physical suppression. Classroom environments are frequently designed as sensory traps. They suppress the natural micro-movements, the fidgeting, the pacing, the posture changes required for optimal brain function. Modern neuroscience shows that movement and cognition are deeply linked. Physical activity increases blood flow to the brain and spikes the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF. Static seating and harsh artificial fluorescent lighting act as biological stressors that trigger a mild freeze response. This diverts oxygen and glucose away from the creative centers of the brain and toward the primitive survival centers. You are literally making people dumber by forcing them to sit still in a box. The high-velocity mechanism, how elite learners master anything. How do high-velocity learners master complex domains in a fraction of the standard time? The mechanism relies on the systematic application of first principles. This involves deconstructing information into its most basic, undeniable physical truths. By stripping away the analogies, the metaphors, and the received wisdom of the textbook, you build a foundation that is structurally sound. You don't learn the rules of a subject. You learn the fundamental laws of logic and physics that govern why those rules exist. When you understand the root, the branches are easy to navigate. Biological friction, the plasticity response. Neural plasticity is not a gift or a talent. It is a biological response to a high-friction environment. The brain only rewires its physical structure when it is forced to solve a dynamic problem that it currently cannot handle. If the learning feels easy or comfortable, you aren't actually learning, you are merely reviewing. True mastery requires a state of desirable difficulty, a sweet spot of frustration, where the neural pathways are under mechanical tension. High-velocity learners seek out the feeling of confusion because they know it is the chemical precursor to a breakthrough. Mechanical bypassing, spaced repetition. Spaced repetition is the only mechanical method to bypass the brain's natural pruning process. By re-engaging with a concept at the exact moment it begins to fade from memory, you signal to the biology that this specific data point is a survival requirement. This forces the transition from fragile chemical short-term memory to permanent structural protein synthesis in the brain. It is the difference between a drawing in the sand and a carving in stone. The diagnostic tool, the Feynman Technique. The Feynman Technique is a diagnostic tool used to identify and repair structural gaps. By attempting to explain a complex concept in the simplest possible terms to a non-expert, you expose the hollow spots in your own understanding. If you cannot explain it without using jargon or complex terminology, you do not own the knowledge. You are merely borrowing the language of someone else. High-velocity learners use this to stress test their mental models until they are unbreakable. The lattice work, contextual hooking. Contextual learning ensures that every piece of data is hooked to a pre-existing neurological framework. Information without context is like a file without a directory path. It is technically stored on the drive, but it is unretrievable when you need it. High-velocity learners build a mental latticework where every new fact reinforces the strength of the entire structure. They ask, how does this new economic theory relate to what I know about biological evolution? Or how does this coding logic mirror the structure of a music chord? They turn their knowledge into a single unified web, rather than a collection of separate drawers. The immune person, velocity of comprehension. The immune person mentioned at 1 minute is the one who understands the velocity of comprehension. This metric measures how quickly a raw, abstract concept is converted into a functional, applicable skill. It is the difference between knowing about a hammer and knowing how to swing it to drive a nail. A high-velocity comprehension indicates a state of total mental permeability. This is the absence of the ego guard that usually rejects new information because it challenges a previous identity or belief. This person doesn't seek to be right. They seek to be functional. They treat their mental models like software that requires constant, aggressive, and often painful updates. Hardware versus software, the failure myth. Academic failure is not an intellectual deficit. It is a mechanical mismatch between the student's hardware and the institution's software. When a student fails, it is usually because the delivery method triggered a defensive shutdown in the brain's amygdala. The system blames the engine for the low-quality fuel it was provided. We are diagnosing learning disabilities in children who are simply too high performance to run on such slow, outdated software. The sunk cost, velocity of unlearning. The unresolved mystery from the psychological analysis was the velocity of detachment. In education, the equivalent is the velocity of unlearning. This is the speed at which you can discard an obsolete or incorrect mental model once a more efficient one is presented. The greatest bottleneck to new learning is not a lack of intelligence. It is the sunk cost of old, comfortable information. The master is the one who can say, "I was wrong," and delete the old file in a millisecond. The biological hack, immediate application. The 1-methylpiperazine of the learning world is the immediate application protocol. By using new information to solve a real-world problem within the first hour of acquisition, you hide the novelty of the data from the brain's defensive pruning mechanisms. You convince the biology that this information is a tool for survival. When the brain sees a tool being used to solve a problem, it prioritizes that data for permanent storage. Sovereignty, the only one method. Intelligence is not a fixed asset determined by genetics at birth. It is the absence of information processing friction. It is a measure of how cleanly your system can ingest, process, and output data. If the internal pipes are clogged with educational rituals, compliance requirements, and ego protection, the processing power will always be throttled. The only one method for true education is not a specific school or an expensive degree. Complete intellectual sovereignty is achieved through the total ownership of your learning environment. You must become the architect of your own curriculum. You cannot master what you do not experience, and you cannot experience what you do not initiate. Passive consumption is the enemy of mastery. Most educational platforms are designed to sell you the feeling of progress. They use progress bars, digital badges, and certificates to simulate growth while maintaining your financial and psychological dependency on their system. They want you to stay in the learning phase forever, because doing makes you independent of their revenue model. The immune person's 1-methylpiperazine is a metaphor for a perfectly calibrated curiosity engine. This engine doesn't wait for a teacher to provide a spark or a syllabus to provide a path. It generates its own heat through the constant, aggressive questioning of the status quo. If the internal engine is correctly tuned, the external curriculum cannot initiate a state of stagnation. The void, becoming a non-target. Both systems rely on creating a void where the institutional gatekeeper or the failure label expects a target. If you don't play the compliance game, if you refuse to validate yourself through their metrics, the labels cannot stick to you. You become a non-target for the industrial education system, moving through the world based on the raw utility of your skills, rather than the prestige of your paper credentials. Educational optimization is a continuous process of deconstruction. You must be willing to tear down your own knowledge base to build something more efficient. It is measured in the utility of your knowledge, how much change you can actually affect in the physical world. The math of the brain is indifferent to your certificates or your participation awards. It only cares about the signal-to-noise ratio. If your brain is filled with the noise of compliance, there is no room for the signal of competence. The biology will prioritize whatever you focus on. If you focus on the grade, you get the grade, but you lose the knowledge. Focus on the removal of learning bottlenecks, rather than the addition of external credentials. Identify where the friction is. Is it the environment, the method, the ego? Remove the obstacle, and the learning happens automatically as a biological necessity. Everything else is just a distraction designed to keep you paying for access to information that is already free and ubiquitous. The gatekeepers are gone. The only thing left is your ability to manage your own cognitive velocity. If you want more things that work, subscribe.